being observant requires that you pay attention. It also requires that you don't have preconceptions. It takes a lot of work to see what's there instead of what you think should be there. Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 74. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. I hope all of you are having a good week. I'm recording this just a few days in advance, and my week so far has been great. It's been one of those weeks that is completely opposite of normal. You know, normal for me is I plan 1 hour to do something and realize I should have planned 2 or 3. I mean, that's not always the case, but it is so often the case. And I've gotten better over the years. I've realized that whatever I think, whatever my impulse is to allot for a task, I automatically schedule 2 or 3 times more than that. So I'm getting closer to that all the time. But I've had 2 days in a row this week where everything was quicker than I'd anticipated. And I got to the point to where I'm actually doing this intro a full day early. So I'm a full day ahead. I'm recording this on a Wednesday. Normally Thursday is the day that I've allotted to, add the intro, to make sure that I'm not missing any recent feedback or anything that needs to go on to the episode to keep this portion as current as possible. Okay, I'm only going to mention this at the beginning of maybe a few more episodes before I kind of let this go, but as a reminder, it really will help me for future planning to know your preference if this is the type of episode that you would like more of or fewer of. So I urge you to let me know either way. You can send me a message at davidlanemusic.com, or you can send me a direct message on Instagram at davidlanemusic, or on Facebook at David M. Lane Music. This is not anything you need to go to my SpeakPipe channel for to tell me anything to include on the podcast. This is just private feedback. It's just helping me know your preference. Now, I'll go ahead and say, not to sway you either way, I really like today's episode that I'm going to get to in just a moment. I think it's something that I think you'll be able to tell I'm pretty passionate about it. And, I look forward to sharing that with you. But just once again, we're almost episode 75. We're almost 3/4 of the way to 100. And I've just bookmarked 100 as my goal for when I get to that episode. I want episode 100 onward to seem different than the first 99 episodes. And I'm not going to really give away what all those changes are, but one thing that's really important to me is to tighten up the focus of this podcast. I've had a lot of fun of just being like all things musicianship, and found ways to tie it in to a podcast about musician tools. But that's the other thing. I might even be considering the name of this podcast. I might be deciding whether or not the topics we cover suits the name. And there's a lot of ways to go about that, but it starts with your honest, open feedback about what you would like to hear more of and what you could stand to have fewer of as far as episodes go. So anyway, on to today's topic. I'm talking about something that I posted a video on a few months ago on YouTube. And I'm actually going to play the audio from that YouTube video, and I'm just going to add a little bit to it. So if you've seen the YouTube video, which I'm going to put the link in my show notes because it is visual. It is something that would be a little bit better if you were to watch it, although I think there's enough narration in the video that you can kind of follow what's going on even if you're not looking at it, but I do think there's some added value if you can go take a look at it. But if you have seen that already, I'm going to elaborate a little bit, and I think it's important enough to just kind of hit this topic more than once. So this is about the skill of observation. And it was something that when I started teaching it didn't take me long to notice that most students of a lot of ages, not just young students, but adults as well, have not developed the skill or habit of observation very well. I've read all of the Sherlock Holmes short stories and novels at least once by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the originals. The first two are novels. I believe they're called A Study in Scarlet and A Sign of Four. And then he wrote his first collection of short stories compiled as The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And don't hold me to it because I haven't read it recently, but I believe it's the first short story in that collection, where as an exercise, Sherlock Holmes asks Dr. Watson how many steps there are leading up from the street to the front door. Actually, rather than paraphrasing, I just pulled out the book. So let me read this. This is from the story called A Scandal in Bohemia. And this is a conversation between Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. It starts with Sherlock Holmes speaking. And he says, "You see, but you do not observe. The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead up from the hall to this room." Frequently. How often? Well, some hundreds of times. Then how many are there? How many? I don't know. Quite so. You have not observed, and yet you have seen. That is just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. And I just love that. That is like the singular point that I love about the series. The series is all about how Sherlock Holmes deduces so much from like a glance or just, meeting someone. He can tell where they've been and all that. And he wows everybody with like a certain type of mark that's found on their shoe or something about their fingernails or some kind of stain on their shirt. So not that you have to, get into this Superman level, super detective level of observation like Sherlock Holmes has. I found that interesting when I first read that because I always notice how many steps there are. And I started doing that just as a matter of, it may come in handy if I'm carrying something like a big box or something and I can't see my feet, can't see the steps. I want to count and know with accuracy. I can tell you at my house there are 13 steps between the first two floors. I can tell you where I teach in Winston-Salem. There's 18 steps leading from the store floor down to the basement level where I teach. Being observant requires that you pay attention. It also requires that you don't have preconceptions. It takes a lot of work to see what's there instead of what you think should be there. I'm going to give you an example of something and let me know, comment or on this post or send me a message if you agree, because I'd like to know if this is common or not. I find that I cannot find what I'm looking for if I think it's a different color than what it is. My wife can go ask me to look for, it could be a water bottle. It could be something like that. It could be that big, but a lot of times it's something a little different. Like she wants me to go find a jewelry box or something like that. And I might think in my head, this is a burgundy red box, when in fact it's blue. I will pass by that blue box over and over, never seeing it, because my brain is looking for something burgundy red. Now, if she tells me to go find that box, a jewelry box or whatever, and she doesn't tell me what color it is, and I allow my mind to be open that it could be any color, I will probably find it fairly easily. So with observation, it gets in the way if you have assumptions. So you have to remove those assumptions. And then you have to actually look. You have to see. You have to observe. So, this is a good first exercise. Every time you take the steps, just count them. And then recap before you visit them again. I think there's 16 there. I think there's 18 there. By the way, you'll find quite often stairs tend to come when you're climbing them in 8, 10, 12, 14 or 16. I actually found that fascinating that I have 13 steps in this house, because that's not a common number, at least in my experience. Also, go on a normal walk in your house and count how many steps you take for going from one room to the next. Or if you're walking in a neighborhood, you go from one street sign to the next. How often do you go? I found it's very close to within about a dozen or so on average of being 200 steps for my pace going between one block and the next. And if I'm in a downtown area, it tends to be a little narrower one way. It might be 150 steps. Now, it may seem like, well, this is a bit much, but again, observation is like a muscle, and you are exercising that every time you can. So before I say any more, I'm going to share the audio portion of the YouTube video I did where I talk about a clock in my studio, and I talk about the 20 things that you can observe with that. And, you'll hear the portion where I allow those watching to write down as many things as they can in, I think, 45 seconds, and I play a little piano piece that I made up, a little improvisation. And then I talk about the 20 observations that I have, and then I compare that to when you're studying music. Like, I take the simple Clementi Opus 36 number 1 piano sonatina in C, and while I'm playing the first movement, I talk about, with kind of a voiceover, all of the things, not really all the things, but just many of the things that I notice. So here is the audio of that video on YouTube. And again, you can find the full link in the show notes. I want to talk about a typical intermediate level piano piece, something like Clementi's Sonatina Opus 36 number 1. So I'm just going to count off some things that you need to notice. So let's start off with the obvious ones. We want to start off with what is the rhythm. And of course, before we do that, we look at the time signature. We want to make sure that it's treble clef on the top staff, bass clef on the bottom staff. We want to notice what key we're in. And we see the absence of a key signature. We know that we're in C major. Depending on the edition, we may have some fingerings. We almost certainly have a tempo. Mine is marked allegro. You want to notice if there are slurs, if there's staccatos, if there are accents. You want to look at the dynamics. And that's kind of interesting too, because some of the dynamics are marked like with the word crescendo, and others are shown with the hairpin. We want to notice that there's a repeat sign at the halfway point and also at the very end. But then we want to get into other things. We want to notice how it changes to the key of G major halfway through the exposition, and how it goes through a few other keys before it comes back to C major to stay put. We want to notice how the recapitulation is very similar to the exposition, but also how it's different. There are motives, 3, 4, 5 note patterns that pop up throughout. The very first measure appears later toward the end as a figure that goes upside down. And we can go on, and this is part of what it is to explore a piece of music. You get away from the surface, and then you start looking for other things, other details. You have to look big picture, you have to look small picture. So now I want to talk about the clock that I have on this wall over here. So grab yourself a sheet of paper, a scratch sheet of paper will be fine, and I want you to look at this clock, and I want you to write down as many things as you notice about it. It doesn't matter how mundane it is, I just want you to notice every detail that you can see. Now I know it's not going to be as much as you would get if you were in the same room and you could touch it, or you could, see the 3 dimensions of it. So I'll help you out as we go, but let's just start with, can you name 5 things that you notice about this clock? Can you name 10 things about this clock? So I'm going to let you look at it while I play a 45-second improvisation for you. So go ahead and write down what you see. Ready, set, go. Okay, time's up. So let's look at my list of the things that I noticed about this clock. So we'll start with the fact that it's green. It's kind of a swamp green color. The second thing I notice is that it's round. So I know I'm hitting the obvious here, but it is a round object. There are 3 different pointers, or what we call hands, for the hour, the minute, and the second. The fourth thing I notice is that, we have big numbers going from 1 to 12. The fifth thing that I notice is that we have these little minute tick markers along the edge for each minute. There are some small numbers, all divisible by 5. The seventh thing I notice is that, and of course you wouldn't necessarily know this for sure unless you're in the room, but it's made of plastic. The eighth thing also I notice, it's not flat. It does have 3 dimensions. Ninth, there is some paint fading in various places. 10th, another one that's a little obvious, but it ticks once per second, or 60 beats per minute. There are scratches on the face. Number 12. This is interesting. If you look at those big numbers, there are 5 1s and there are 2 2s. The 13th thing I notice is that all 3 of those hands, the hour, minute, and second, they all join in the center, kind of held by a little knob there in the middle. 14th thing, this is a Sterling & Noble brand clock. 15th thing I notice is when I look at that brand, Sterling & Noble, it uses all capital letters. The 16th thing that I notice is that if you look at those little numbers, when you go from 15 to 20 and when you go from 40 to 45, the numbers change directions in the way that they're facing. The 17th thing that I notice is when you look at the little numbers, there are 7 zeros, there are 8 5s, and there is not a single 7, 8, or 9. The 18th thing that I noticed is when I look at the back, it takes 1 AA battery. The 19th thing I notice is also in the back, there is a place for it to hang. And the 20th and the final thing that I noticed this in looking at this exercise is that there are 2 bits that poke out for no apparent reason. Maybe you guys can tell me what it means, but I have no idea what that is for. So this is an exercise that you should try very often. Just pick any object and write down as many things as you can notice. And of course, start doing this with your music. The more you notice, the better of a musician you will be. So just as an exercise, what I would recommend that you do is take a journal, take a notebook, and then take some sheet music that you're working on and just look at the first page, something you're practicing, and write down however many you want, but I would say at least 10, but maybe 15 or 20 things you notice about it. It could be a melodic pattern that repeats. Maybe you notice 2 measures that are very similar, but one, the intervals are upside down from the other, like instead of going up and then back down, it goes down and then back up. Maybe you'll notice a rhythm that's the same, but the notes are different. Maybe there's an articulation pattern. But just go through just that page, just one page of music, and how much can you write down that you have noticed about that piece. And again, this is a skill that transcends music. You will be a smarter, sharper, more successful individual if you improve your powers of observation. So look at any corner or wall or section of your room and just write down as many things as you can. It could be like a crack in the paint. It could be any kind of a flaw. It could be what's on the wall. Look up at the ceiling as well. How many times do you go in a room and not look at the ceiling? Not look up. Make your observation spherical. So not just 360 degrees horizontally, but also up and down all around you. Being aware of your surroundings. Next time you go for a walk, if you're the type of person like I normally am and you like to listen to either audiobook or podcast or maybe music, just once every now and then, don't play anything and just listen to the sounds around you. Try to notice every bird song that you hear. Try to notice the sound of the traffic. Don't tune it out, but pay attention to that. And when you're looking down, notice cracks in the pavement. Try to maybe not step on any of them. That's a good way of kind of observing what's on the ground. If there are leaves on the ground, notice the shape of the leaves. Try to look at every tree. Notice what kind of bark pattern it has. This is really important to do in an era of superficiality, where we just kind of open up our phones and we just scroll and we just see things. And if we're not interested, within 1.5 seconds, we're swiping to the next thing or we're spinning on. There is going to come a time where someone who can pay attention, someone who can see the details, is going to stand out, whether or not you're a professional musician or you just use music to help yourself in other walks of life. The skill of observation will make you a better musician, but it will also make you better, probably in the top half or more of whatever you do. By the way, I record in a house that has another person and multiple pets. My window is facing a busy street. There's traffic going by all the time. Now, I have a pretty good microphone that filters all that out, but I bet if you put on headphones and turned up the volume, you would notice all kinds of things in the background. Increase your powers of observation by exercising it as often as you can. And that's going to wrap up episode number 74. Now, I opened up this episode talking about one kind of feedback. I do want to remind you that you can also give me another type of feedback, and that is a direct response on the content of the episode that you wouldn't mind me sharing, or at least considering having me share on a future podcast episode. So if you have any tips for observation, or if you have any thoughts about observation, anything that you observed while listening to this episode, I can't promise that I will share everything that is submitted, but you can let me know with your voice, sending me a voicemail at speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. As a reminder, the things that you can always do to help this podcast the most is to please share each episode that you find valuable. So if you enjoy this episode, you know someone else who might enjoy it, share it with them directly, share it on your social media feeds. All of that is what we need to continue to grow this audience, to help nurture and build better and more well-rounded musicians. If you feel so inclined, please leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you're allowed to do that on whatever podcast platform you're listening to. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for today. I want to thank you once again so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.